All right, what is up, folks? My name is Melvin, and welcome back to this amazing place that we call the internet. And I am just trying something different here. I always have an issue with the type of articles that I tend to read because they're all just, they don't bring me any value, most of them. And I want to start finding articles that are an interesting read, something I've never learned before, something more interesting. And yeah, if they can also be interesting for YouTube, that's a major plus for me. So I'm going to try something new. So I'm trying to find interesting articles. And when I do, I'm going to just kind of read it for my first time right here and just see where it takes me, because I just want, I want to try a different change of pace, and I want to learn something with you guys. So hopefully this can be like a simpatico relationship. I benefit from you, you benefit from me, things like that. I'm just going to read the article. Once in a while I will stop and just interject if I feel like it. Let's look at the title of this article right here. Let's scroll down. And in the end, 50 years ago, the Beatles went through rock's most famous breakup. Inside the heartbreak, the brotherhood, and why music still matters. Now, I'm going to say as well that I have not read through this. I don't know how long it's going to take me to read through this. Let's just, let's just start. Let's just see what happens. All right. It's a miserable Monday morning in January 1969. Nice. And the Beatles are trying to get back to where they once belonged. The Get Back project sounded like a perfect idea. Just the four lads and their instruments ready to hit the studio, return to their roots, conjure up some great songs out of thin air, just like they used to. John, Paul, George, and Ringo have booked a TV concert special for January 18th, their first live show in years. They'll rehearse for a couple of weeks, eyeball to eyeball, summon up genius on the spur of the moment. They've done it many times before. They've never not done it. I just want to just say a quick thing about the Beatles. I've listened to a lot of their classics, like who hasn't, but I haven't listened to their discography. I am fans of them for the most part, but not like super huge fans, I don't see them as the best things since sliced bread, but a lot of people do, which is, it's all good. I can't really think of a lot of real criticisms of the Beatles. That's all I want to say. The good news, Paul showed up today, and so did Ringo. So did the camera crew. These sessions are being filmed, so the Beatles can show a half-hour clip of rehearsal footage before their TV performance. So here they are Monday morning, ready to dazzle the world with a blast of spontaneous Beatles brilliance. Or at least Paul and Ringo are. Hey, have you heard from John and Yoko? Or George? With George, there's a slight complication. He quit the band. On Friday, with the cameras rolling, he was trying to teach them a new song, All Things Must Pass. John strung out on his new heroin habit, sneered at George with open contempt. George finally stormed out muttering, "See you around the clubs." John doesn't take this seriously. I think if George doesn't come back by Monday or Tuesday, we ask Aaron Clapton to play in it. He says, "The point is, if George leaves, do we want to carry on the Beatles? I do. We should just get other members and carry on." But now it's Monday, and still no George, no John and Yoko. Paul and Ringo killing time, jamming on current radio hits, Build Me Up, Buttercup. But everyone gathers to discuss the crisis, complaining bitterly about Yoko's constant presence. Surprisingly, the one who sticks up for her is Paul. He's a sucker for a love story. He's Paul McCartney, for God's sakes. But he also knows how much this romance means to the oldest, closest mate, his most troubled and cruel and impossible friend. It's not that bad, he insists. They want to stay together, those two. So it's all right. Let the young lovers be together. I just want to interject. Yeah, everyone knows about the Yoko, how Yoko broke up the Beatles. I don't know how true that is, but that's always like a fun. It's like, oh, you're the Yoko of the group. I don't know. It's just it's a funny saying. Paul has to chuckle thinking about how future generations will look back at this. The Beatles, the greatest of all rock and roll bands, the world's most legendary creative team, falling apart over such a trivial spat. Even on a winter morning as gloomy as this one, Paul breaks into a laugh. It's going to be such an incredible sort of comical thing. Like in 50 years' time, they broke up. Yono sat on an amp. Paul wasn't wrong. 50 years later, people still obsess over the end of the Beatles. It's the world's favorite story about how things fall apart. Like Fleetwood Mac on Rumors. The Beatles' Let It Be has come to symbolize the whole concept of breaking up. The Beatles are an ultimate archetype of a team of friends working together, scheming together, making music together, and inevitably tearing one another apart. We all know how the story went. The TV special never happens. Instead, the Beatles play their famous goodbye concert on the roof of their Apple headquarters in London until the cops shut them down. Later that year, they make one more masterpiece, Abbey Road. While the Get Back tapes gather dust, new business manager Alan Klein releases the Get Back footage as a feature film, retitled Let It Be, along with an album of the same name. The movie premieres in May 1970, a few weeks after Paul announces the Beatles split. All four refuse to show up for the premiere. Phil Spector doctors the tape into a slapdash soundtrack. Soon, John writes a song called God, announcing, "I don't believe in Beatles." The four Beatles never set foot in the same room ever again. So yeah, there is a lot of it seems like there's a lot happening that maybe gets explained later in the article, but for now it just doesn't. And yeah, it's just one of those things that, it happens. People move on, things change. Things are never meant to be the same. And especially in the world of art, things should change. You should expect change. At least I think so. Because if things become stagnant, it just stops becoming art, then it starts becoming just kind of New York buildings where everything looks the same and nothing looks interesting. So you should expect change. The world has spent 50 years collecting the cliched narratives. John and Paul were fighting. Paul and Yoko were fighting. John and Yoko became junkies. The money man came between them. The drugs came between them. The wives came between them. All these things must pass. The dream is over. But as with most Beatles stories, the truth is a lot more complicated when you look closely. In the end, it's really a story of four friends trying to hold on to one another in a dark and confusing time, searching for a way to shine on until tomorrow. Like everyone else, John, Paul, George, and Ringo witnessed the end of the Beatles with shock and disbelief. No idea how to apply the brakes. None of them really imagined this was the end. And then you can see right here, this is the cover. Oh my god. Oh, it's a very modern cover. It says a big farmer's COVID-19 profiteers. And then at the bottom, the end of the Beatles. Why the heartbreak, the brotherhood, and why the music matters 50 years later. Oh, so I guess it's the 50-year anniversary of the Beatles breaking up. And again, people are still talking about it. It seems like the characters in the Beatles, like the band group, is just as important to the history of the Beatles as the Beatles itself. They're they have an identity past the Beatles. So yeah. And then it says the Beatles photographed at Tittenhurst Park in Essex, England on August 22nd, 1969. Nice. How did they pour so much raw emotion into their songs when they couldn't communicate any other way? That's always been the real mystery at the heart of the Beatles breakup. In their hour of darkness, how did they come together to create music that has always given people hope? In times of trouble, in 2020, that question has a new kind of renaissance. The Beatles felt relief at the end of their rooftop concert. You can hear it in Paul's voice when he says, "Thanks, Mo." A shout out to Ringo's wife, Maureen, who was cheering them on. Her fangirl energy more badly needed than ever. They were sitting on 56 hours of film, 200 hours of audio tape, 21 days worth of chaos, but they couldn't stomach the idea of going back through all that footage. As John admitted, "I couldn't be bothered because it was such a tough one making it. We were really miserable then." The movie Let It Be became a cult rarity, only briefly available on video. I saw it at a midnight screening in a Boston theater in the 80s, with a stoner crowd who booed every time Yoko was on screen. The film looked grainy and cheap. The mood was ugly, both on screen and in the audience. Spector's mix felt like a clumsy coda to the Beatles' epic run. Even though it was recorded more than a year before the split, with the triumph of Abbey Road in between, Let It Be seemed to document their crash, like some kind of rock and roll Zapruder film. I gotta look up what Zapruder is. It turned into the Beatles' accidental tombstone. Let It Be dropped out of movie theaters fast and has barely been seen anywhere since 1970. Most fans only know the famous anthology snippet of George and Paul arguing over a guitar part. Few films have been so analyzed and interpreted by people who've never seen it. John and Yoko finally saw it in an empty movie theater in San Francisco in June 1970, along with Rolling Stones founder Jan S. Wenner and his wife Jane. Jan. The four of them bought their tickets at the door and sat unnoticed in the afternoon matinee. Just bought tickets and went in. Wenner recalled years later, "I don't think anybody even really knew we were there. It was empty afternoon and during a weekday, so the four of us are sitting together in the middle of the theater, watching this thing about the breakup of all of the Beatles." John couldn't hide his tears. "I just remember walking out of the theater and all of us in a foursome huddle, hugging, and the sadness of the occasion." Peter Jackson, the director behind Lord of the Rings trilogy and the World War I documentary They Shall Not Grow Old, boldly went into the Get Back vaults to find the rest of the story for a Disney documentary, due out next year. As he puts it, "Everything I thought I knew changed. Jackson's The Beatles Get Back is not a remake of Let It Be. It will be a whole new film showing that Paul and Ringo weren't kidding when they said Let It Be showed only the negative side of the story." Jackson's Get Back footage promises to be full of warmth and camaraderie. John and Paul were with acoustic guitars busking Two of Us when John breaks into Obladi Oblada. I've never heard of that. All right. To crack up with his mates. Paul leading an early romp. She came in through the bathroom window with John shouting back at each line, "Get a job, Gob." The band having a bash at their 1965 oldie Help, halfway treating it as a joke, but inevitably tapping into the song's adult despair. You see them write songs that ended up on Abbey Road or solo albums, like when John and Paul whip up Imagine classics. Give me some truth. The mischief on their faces, the eye contact, the collective electricity in the playing. There's a lot more of the Beatles team's spirit than you'd guess from the reputation. When the surviving Beatles asked Jackson to get involved, he wasn't sure he was up to the job. "As a longtime Beatles fan, I really wasn't looking forward to it," he says. "I thought, if what we've seen is the stuff they allow people to see, what are the other 55 hours going to be? When I went to Apple, my feet were heavy. I thought I should be excited, but I just dread what I'm about to see." Like most fans, he associated Let It Be with sour times, even though Let It Be wasn't filmed with the breakup in mind. Jackson said, "It was filmed 14 months earlier. I can just imagine that if you were going to the cinema in May of 1970 and you just heard that the Beatles had broken up, then you're obviously going to look at the movie through a particular filter. I think I think that has led to it being known as the breakup film. But it's not really a breakup film in the slightest. Of course, Paul and Ringo have claimed that they had plenty of laughs during the Get Back session, with only the arguments making the movie. Could they be right about Get Back and the rest of us wrong? As reality TV heels always complain, it's all in the editing. And then there's another photo right here. So I guess this is the Beatles playing on camera for the Get Back project. They were stuck in the Twickenham film studio rather than their more familiar and comfortable Abbey Road. So I guess I should really look at this documentary when it comes out, because again, I don't know anything about the Beatles breakup except for Yoko Ono, but I'm sure there's a lot more to the story. I'm sure there's a lot, especially when you're not only playing together, but you're also making songs together. That can definitely lead to some creative differences. Giles Martin, who recently produced masterful anniversary editions of Sgt. Pepper, Abbey Road, and the White Album, memorably tagged the band's die-hard completist geeks as the Socks and Sandals Brigade. Jackson admits he's a proud member of that tribe. I was buying bootlegs since the late 70s. I got 6 of the Get Back session bootlegs on vinyl, like 9 LPs worth in some box, and I still have the stuff. But the boots didn't prepare him for the story he found in the vaults. Just me personally as a fan looking at the 56 hours, I get a sense of a group that wants to do something different, but they run out of places to go. Jackson says they never wanted to repeat themselves. They didn't want to make Sgt. Pepper 2. There's even conversation we've got a film where they're discussing maybe if we went back and became the Cavern Club band again, becoming the Lunchtime Bender Gang, because they can't play a stadium that's bigger than Shea. They've done complex albums. They've done simple albums. You get the sense that they really don't want to break up. That's the overriding impression I get. They're a forward-moving band, but they've run out of places to go. There's a hilarious scene where director Michael Lindsay Hogg first mentions the idea of turning the rehearsal footage into a movie. They all started arguing, of course, over whether it'll work technically. It was shot for 60s TV. The 16mm film got blown up to 35mm for movie scenes, which is why Let It Be always looked so shabby. Technically restored, the Get Back footage finally looks like the Beatles. Paul argues the film will be too grainy for theaters. George just tosses his head. If they don't take it, they're fucking fools. All 4 Beatles at heart shared that magnificent arrogance in a way. That's what's helped keep them together. Through all their ups and downs, without that level of arrogance, there's no way an adventure as admittably daft as Get Back could happen in the first place. All right, so it seems like even the movie had controversy between the band. So it's just like kind of everything just falling downhill. And, you know, we all face those moments where we want things to work and they just don't. But it's really hard when you've made some of your most well-known work in that environment, and now you're coming to the idea that it's not working anymore. For some people, it could be very traumatizing. You see that with some people who they're only known for a particular role, and it's just like they can't escape their kind of their title, their label. And they just kind of, they kind of go mad, with how the audience perceives them. And it does seem like they kind of went through that, like the name, the Beatles, like we're the Beatles. That's such a powerful statement right there, and when you don't, if you come to a conclusion that, oh, maybe I won't be the Beatles anymore. Maybe we won't be. Yeah, that's going from like the top of the mountain to like kind of I wouldn't say the bottom of a crevice, but maybe just kind of on the streets, on sea level or something. That's still a long way down, All right. When the Beatles dazzled the world with Rubber Soul, Revolver, and Sgt. Pepper, they were on fire with collaborative energy. Sgt. Pepper was their last stand as four lads against the world, released just before original manager Brian Epstein died. Man, I can't hear the name Epstein anymore. Right up until Epstein's death, they were four soulmates who wanted to spend their free time together. Even when they weren't joking, most people don't get across to us, Lennon said in 1967 in Hunter Davis's biography. We never really communicated with other people. Now that we don't meet strangers at all, there is no need for any communication. We understand each other. It doesn't matter about the rest. When they quit touring after Revolver, they tried taking a 3-month break, but they missed each other too much, as John said. I didn't meet anyone else I liked. Epstein had been their biggest fan, their cheerleader. Nothing for the Beatles was ever the same. We've been very negative since Mr. Epstein's passed away, Paul said in the Get Back session. That's why all of us have been sick of the group. The Get Back experiment, the crazy idea of a live show they were too rusty to play, the confidence that they could whip up great songs from scratch whenever the mood struck came from their love of being Beatles together. They spent 5 stormy months making the White Album, but as the great 50th anniversary edition moved, all that late night madness and chaos produced their most astounding music. Way more than they could fit on a debut album. By March of 1969, all 4 were husbands, 3 were dads. All were trying to build an adult life, figuring out how the band might fit into it. But without any role models to show the way, George was hanging with Bob Dylan and Eric Clapton, rock stars who treated him with the respect he craved from his bandmates. And then, that's another thing, becoming a husband and becoming a father, like that is also, you're starting to gain other identities that is no longer the Beatles. And that's already going to cloud kind of the freedom of just being the Beatles. When you have that soul freedom, then you can put more investment in your art. When you're a husband and when you're a parent, that's a lot less time to commit to it. And I'm not saying it's impossible to be a world famous artist and a parent and a husband. There's a lot of people who can, manage all 3 of them. But it does change your perspective of the world, and we love seeing artists in their own world. We love seeing that. We want these artists to stay in their own world, but they're people, they're human beings. They need different forms of outlets. That's not just one particular thing. In the spring of 1968, John and Paul had made a quick visit to New York to announce their new Apple Corps venture, dropping by The Tonight Show for an awkward chat with sportscaster and guest host George Garagiola and Hollywood diva Tallulah Bankhead, neither of whom knew a thing about them. There's a reveal moment when Garagiola asks, "The 4 of you socially, are you that close?" John and Paul look at him like he's from Mars. John snorts, "We're close friends, But within a couple of weeks, John had firebombed his life. He spent a hard day's night with Yoko Ono, recording their ambient noise collage, 2 Virgins. Okay, then consummating their affair at dawn when the Beatles show up for the White Album sessions. They were surprised to see Yoko at his side in the studio. After that, all access to John was through her. That first day, she joined the band for a jam on Revolution 1. Although people called Yoko a visual artist, she was a musician first, a classically trained composer who collaborated with legends like John Cage, La Monte Young, and Ornette Coleman before hooking up with John. Yoko was not one to wait her turn before speaking her mind and had no interest in respecting or even noticing the Beatles' boundaries. Yoko was naive, John told Rolling Stones. She came in and she would expect to perform with them like you would with any other group. And then here's a picture right here. So this is Lennon and Ono leaving what is with all these words I cannot pronounce? Gibraltar. After getting married, John adopted Yoko's name, becoming John Ono Lennon, a radical step in 1969. Look at this happy couple right here. All right. Two Virgins came out in November 1968 and remains the most infamously offensive album in history. Oh, and I did not know that. Not because of the songs, there aren't any, but the cover with John and Yoko's full frontal nudity. It just seemed natural for us. If we made an album together to be naked, John told Rolling Stone. Of course, I've never seen me prick on an album or on a photo before. Paul contributed liner notes when two great saints meet in a humbling experience. On October 18th of that year, John and Yoko got busted by the Scotland Yard drug squad. Soon after getting arrested, Yoko suffered a miscarriage. The White Album came out to universal acclaim, but devastated by their lost pregnancy, the couple turned to heroin. Holy shit. I did not know that. I mean, I knew there were drugs involved, but heroin, that's a very serious drug. In all the turmoil of 1968, there was a moment of brightness. Hey Jude, a song Paul made up on a visit to John's estranged wife and son, checking in on them after the painful split. He brought a red rose for Cynthia, a kind gesture she remembered the rest of her life. For 5-year-old Julian, he brought a tune. Hey Jude became the Beatles' biggest hit. They played it on the ABC, surrounded by fans around the piano, lifting the song into a better, better, better climax. Their closest encounter with a live audience in years. Get Back was a self-conscious attempt to recreate the warmth of that moment in the same TV studio with the same director, Michael Lindsay Hogg. Yeah, I really like the song Hey Jude. Hey Jude is it's a nice tune. If you want me to be nitpicky, it goes on for a little bit too long, but it's a nice song. It's definitely one of those songs you need to sing with a group because everyone's going to get a little bit emotional. But the sessions were tough from the start. For one thing, the cars came around to pick them up at the crack of dawn. None of the Beatles were morning people. George later fumed. Have to get up at 8 and get into my guitar. John and Yoko were zonked by narcotics. Instead of Abbey Road, their own private clubhouse for around-the-clock artistic mayhem, they were stuck in Twickenham Film Studio, surrounded by strangers with cameras. There were plenty of laughs, but also nasty fights. Paul shuddered. I get the horrors every morning about 9 o'clock. When I get my toast and tea. They showed up with great songs. On the first day, John brought Don't Let Me Down and Dig a Pony, while George had All Things Must Pass. Paul works John's Everybody Had a hard year into his own I've Got a Feeling. Get Back began as a political statement, Commonwealth song, defending Pakistani immigrants. You ever get those issues where it's like you see a word and you just can't, the way it looks is not the way it sounds in your head. Defending Pakistani immigrants, a hot topic in England after racist politician Enoch Powell's anti-immigration crusade. They later tried our songs that would evolve into their next album, Abbey Road, Something, Her Majesty, Oh Darling. But within a few days, Paul and George were sniping over a guitar part. Paul said, I always hear myself annoying you. George sneered, I'll play what you want me to play, or I won't play it at all if you don't want me to play. Whatever it is that will please you, I will do it. So yeah, we're starting to see some more just arguing, more bickering, but again, that happens. As rockstar arguments go, this was fairly tame, but the cameras made it worse. The next day, George said, "I don't want to do any of my songs on the show because they'll turn out shitty. They'll come out like a compromise." He added, "Maybe we should get a divorce," Paul muttered. "Well, I said that at the last meeting. It's getting near it." All right. The mood brightened as soon as they moved the session to Apple. They brought in keyboardist Billy Preston as a calming influence. The first time Preston sat in, they jammed on "Don't Let Me Down" with John yelling in his mock poacher voice. "I had a dream this afternoon." After a Preston solo, he marveled, "I say, take it." And he takes it. "You're giving us a lift, Bill." George added, "We've been doing this for days, weeks, just choking." John and George lobbied to enlist Preston as a full-time Beatle, but Paul shook his head. It's bad enough with 4. The Beatles debated endlessly about how to bring this project in for a landing. They knew they wouldn't be ready in time for January 18th live show they've planned. But where should they play these new songs? A cathedral? A hospital? An ocean liner? John scoffed, "I'm warming up to the idea of an asylum." They realized the answer was right on top of them. Up on the roof. The rooftop gig was their first live performance in more than 2 years and their last. Nobody realized it would be so cold up there, which is why John and Ringo were wearing their ladies' winter coats. Even the Beatles seemed surprised by how great they sound in the final minute of "I've Got a Feeling." John can't resist spontaneous "fuck yeah." As always, they wanted to move forward. John had a new figure in his life he was excited about. In fact, John impulsively signed over complete control of his business affairs to American stranger in writing. Within hours of meeting him for the first time, John couldn't wait for the others to meet his new manager, Alan Klein. Oh my God, that scared the crap out of me. That was my phone. My phone's always giving me stupid notifications. Oh my God. All right. So yeah, it's nice when things can come together. Personally, I've always wanted to work in a group, but there's always pros and cons with working in a group, and clearly we're seeing those pros and cons. But I don't know, there's nothing more satisfying than just kind of, seeing a group come together, getting something done. That's very exciting, and I'm very happy they were able to do that on their last. It's always good to end on a high note, but again, with a group so with a group so popular like the Beatles, and with all these hits, it's like, who cares if they kind of ended on a sour note? Like, it's sad, but they're the Beatles. Like, they made hits. If you make a hit in your life, congratulations. You should feel proud of that. In the afternoon of Brian Epstein's death, 4 brash New Yorkers entered the Beatles' inner circle. A Tokyo-born avant-garde artist named Yoko Ono, a photographer named Linda Eastman, a music-bizzed wheeler-dealer named Alan Klein, and an eccentric producer named Phil Spector. Different as they were, all 4 had confidence. None of them were intimidated by the band. None were crippled by British manners. Their rough edges appealed to the Beatles and made them easier to trust. All 4 had a massive impact on the Beatles' chemistry. Klein is easily the least famous of the 4, but arguably the one who played the biggest role in their demise. Oof. All right. And we see a photo right here. Lennon and Ono with Alan Klein in 1969. Klein had spent years in the business, developing an unsavory reputation, but he won Lennon over immediately. McCartney was much more skeptical. He's not good enough. All right. Klein spent years in his business working with artists like Sam Cooke, yet developing an unsavory reputation. He had the Rolling Stones under his thumb and walked off their catalog. But Mick Jagger, perhaps not scrupulous, I've never said that word before, about his rival's fate declined to warn them. According to Paul, he said he's all right if you like that kind of thing, washing his hands and helping seal their fate. Really, it was Mick who got us together, John told Wenner in 1970. I had heard about all those dreadful rumors about them, but I could never coordinate it with the fact that the Stones seemed to be going on and on with him and nobody ever said a word. Mick's not the type to just clam up, so I started thinking he must be all right. John and Yoko met with Klein at the Dorchester Hotel. John, always in the market for a new father figure, fell in love, as he put it. Anybody who knew me that well without having met me had to be a guy I could let look after me. Even Klein must have been surprised how easy it was to flatter John into signing over his life's work. It was the most feeble effort from a British negotiator since Neville Chamberlain. Once Klein had that signature, the band was doomed. But Paul distrusted Klein from the start. I am not signed with Alan Klein because I don't like him and I don't think he's the man for me. However, much of the other three like him. He told Rolling Stones Paul wanted to hire his father-in-law, Lee Eastman, which was unacceptable for the rest of the band, who signed on with Klein. John got furious at Paul's reluctance to play along. He was playing hard to get like a fucking chick. Paul's suspicions were validated by the early 1970s when his bandmates had their own lawsuits with Klein. He also went to jail for income tax evasion. In the end, we did get rid of Alan Klein, Ringo said in an anthology. It cost us a small fortune, but Klein had wedged himself between the Beatles. In the summer of 1967, they were hanging out with the Maharishi. 2 years later, they were spending too much time with the lawyers and accountants. As Lennon told Rolling Stones in 1970, it just got that Paul would say, "Speak to my lawyer. I don't want to speak about business anymore," which meant, "I'm going to drag my feet and try to fuck you." Paul and Linda got married in March of 1969. Harrison and Patty Boyd came to the reception straight from the police station, where they'd just gotten busted by the same cops who raided John and Yoko. Like John, Georgie insisted the cops brought their own stash. He was offered when they claimed they found a pot in his closet, tucked in his sock. "I'm a tidy sort of bloke. I don't like chaos. I kept records in the records rack, tea in the tea caddy, and pot in the pot box." When John and Yoko married, he took her name, becoming John Ono Lennon, a radical step in 1969. But John and Paul were not ordinary rock stars getting married. Their new wives were independent adults, artists with their own careers, women who'd already married and divorced and had kids. There weren't many rock stars of their generation with such a prophetic idea of male-female partnerships. But they were looking to explore new models of monogamy outside the nouveau hippie patriarchy. When Mick Jagger sniffed at Yoko and when Mick Jagger sniffed at Yoko and Linda, Paul was fond of quoting Mick, "I wouldn't have my old lady in the band." It was exactly the mentality John and Paul were looking to escape. John and Paul teamed up for a quickie single, The Ballad of John and Yoko. Neither the first nor the last time John would go a bit overboard, comparing himself to Jesus. They recorded as a duo, John on guitar, Paul on drums, while George and Ringo were out of town. In the outtake released on the 2019 Abbey Road box, they begin with a poignant quip. John says, "A bit faster, Ringo." Paul replies, "Okay, George." The instrumental tag comes from the Honeymoon song, a corny showbiz oldie that Beatles used to play in their cavern days. It's a private joke between John and Paul, one they knew would go totally unnoticed by the millions of listeners, including Yoko and Linda. It's a touching sign of how deeply in love they remained with their band and each other. But while John and Yoko were on their honeymoon in Amsterdam, doing their week-long bed in for peace, they got a rude shock. The publisher Dick James took advantage of their absence to begin selling their songs to Sir Lou Grade without giving them a chance to make a bid. It was an ugly reminder that all of their hippie ideals, the Beatles were still prey to the sleaziest music biz sharks. Yeah, so I guess the music business was not kind even to the Beatles. The music business, God, they're some of the biggest sharks you'll ever find. The Beatles rebounded from Get Back with Abbey Road. It's always been their most popular album, mainly because it's their warmest. John and George wrote self-conscious Beatles songs, as if they'd never get another chance to write for the band. George knew he'd get stuck with his usual 2 songs per album, but he got his revenge. His tunes Here Comes the Sun and Something were upbeat pop benedictions. Yeah, a lot of fancy words that scared John and Paul into stepping up on their own songwriting game. Since Yoko was recuperating from a car crash, John had a hospital bed set up in the studio so she could comment and critique. A weird situation, sure, but why fight it? All 4 Beatles were making an effort to get along. Not too much heavy breathing, as Paul later put it. They were already dreaming of solo success. Give peace a chance. The anti-war chant John and Yoko recorded in a Montreal hotel bed was number 2 smash in the UK. Ringo was getting groomed for movie stardom. They no longer saw Beatles records as their only chance to express themselves, so they felt confident enough to throw themselves into one more Beatles summer when they jammed on I Want You. It was the last time the 4 played all together. Harrison in London with members of the Radha Krishna Temple in 1969, the year he began recording with them. Yeah, there's a lot about the Beatles I don't know. And if you're learning this stuff too, I'm glad. This is very interesting stuff. This is a very interesting article. George made beautiful music with the Radha Krishna Temple, producing their single Hare Krishna Mantra. Asked if it would hit number 1, they said higher than that. The song made it to number 12 in the UK. That's still impressive. John and Yoko held a London screening for their avant-garde film, including John's self-portrait, which was nothing but a close-up of his penis. Okay. Yoko complained, the critics won't touch it. When John told the others, I want a divorce, nobody took it seriously. He wasn't the first to use this word. Both John and Paul talked about divorce during the Get Back sessions. They urged him not to go public yet, figuring this was just another John whim, like the Apple meeting where he showed up high and announced, I am Jesus Christ, I have come back again. The Beatles had another conference taped for posterity, where they argued over how they'd split the songwriting on any future album. As George puts it, we worked something out, which is still a joke, really. 3 songs for me, 3 songs for Paul, 3 songs for John, and 2 for Ringo. So it seems like they're still trying to collaborate. They're still trying to make equal commitment and equal partnership. And again, it's hard to do with a band. And they all seem to have different creative flows and different styles of thinking, But yeah, Paul fled to his Scottish farm to take care of his newborn daughter and have a little peace and quiet. He didn't get it. The fall of 1969 had another weird twist. The Paul is dead rumor. After a Detroit radio station played the White Album backwards, fans began analyzing their Beatles albums for clues that Paul had secretly died in 1966. John called in to the Detroit station to complain on the air. It's the most stupid rumor I've ever heard. It sounds like the same guy who blew up my Christ remark. John, looking to promote Cold Turkey and his wedding album with Yoko, was in no mood to chat about Paul. The dearly departed had a sense of humor about it, telling the Apple office, it'll probably be the best publicity we've ever had, and I won't have to do a thing except stay alive. But in a Life magazine story on the controversy, Paul said, the Beatles thing is over. The quote made it into print, yet nobody noticed. Everything might have been different if the Beatles had taken some time off like they did after Revolver. They had a great new album. Abbey Road was their biggest commercial smash yet, and plenty of solo projects. They had their wives and kids. They could afford to take the phone off the hook and disappear for a while, but they also had a new business manager, and he needed a new album. So Get Back turned into Let It Be, and the Beatles never recovered. When you think about people to send into a volatile situation, you picture someone like Billy Preston or producer George Martin or even Ringo Starr, somebody who can cheer everyone up, keep a cool head, a team player who doesn't bring a lot of their own baggage or ego in the situation, a grown-up, a pro, a diplomat with patience, empathy, and a fine-tuned sense of tact. The Beatles called Phil Spector. He did not fire a gun in the studio. He didn't even punch anybody. So by Phil Spector standards, he was behaving himself. But inviting him to take over the Get Back tapes bordered on sabotage. At the start of 1970, the last thing the Beatles needed was to reopen their previous winter's arguments. And the last person they needed was Spector, who made his brilliant 60s record by running into the studio as his personal dictatorship. This was like inviting Napoleon to invade your village, as long as he tidy up on the way out. Spector was Klein's guy, but John was all in. He worked with Spector on January 1970 single Instant Karma and liked the way Phil took charge, banging it out in one day. As John boasted, I wrote it for breakfast, recorded it for lunch, and we're putting it out for dinner. Instant Karma got John on top of the pops, a first for a solo Beatle. Yoko sat on a stool as part of the band, neither singing nor playing, but knitting. George Martin, an engineer, Glyn Johns spent 1969 tinkering with the Get Back tapes, compiling them into albums the band rejected as unreleasable. But Klein had an urgent need to get fresh product into the pipeline. He just signed them to a lucrative new deal, cutting himself in on the action. As Peter Jackson explains, Klein needs to get a Beatles album on the marketplace, even though they have broken up, so obviously the Get Back tapes will be sorted as they're the only material he can release. And then we got another picture right here, Ringo riding a tractor at his Brookfield estate in Survey, 1969, before selling his property to Stephen Stills. I'm just going to make a quick point. Please Google Ringo Starr Microsoft Paint. You will thank me later. The American producer, oh my God, my throat is becoming a little parched. Quick water break. Quick ASMR break. Don't worry, we're going to finish this. The American producer came to Abbey Road in March and began turning the tapes into Let It Be with overdubs galore. When he got hold of the long and winding road, it was a Paul piano demo, with John fumbling along the bass. Spector decided to pile on the cheesy orchestral goop, but kept Lennon's inept bass part. It's still there on the finished record. At the 2-minute mark, you can hear Paul try and fail not to laugh at his mate's clumsy playing. In the middle of the line, "You left me standing here." Paul wasn't consulted about what Spector was doing to his song. He was a few blocks away at his Cavendish Avenue pad, fiddling with his new home studio equipment, taping 4-track ditties with Linda. The song were mostly casual acoustic sketches with one classic ballad, Cut Abbey Road. Maybe I'm amazed. He decided to release the tapes as a solo album right away, as if to thumb his nose at how long Get Back was taking. Paul was delighted at a fresh, spontaneous energy of his solo recordings, with the breezy wit of Every Night, Junk, and That Would Be Something. McCartney will come out with a 50th anniversary edition in September in a half-speed mastered reissue, but he planned to rush release it as McCarthy in the same week as Let It Be. It was an obvious conflict, especially since Ringo was about to drop his own album, Sentimental Journey. crooning old-time standards like Stardust that he'd grown up hearing at home. As he explained, "I did it for me mum." The situation called for some delicate negotiation. Needless to say, that's not what happened. On March 31st, John and George sent Ringo over to Paul's house with a remarkably bitchy letter in an envelope marked "From us to you," demanding he push back his album. The letter ends, "We're sorry it turned out like this. It's nothing personal." At the bottom, George asked, "Hare Krishna." Paul was outraged, and Ringo was always the peacemaker. Went back and talked to the others into letting Paul have his way. And again, like, when you become as famous as the Beatles, you want to maintain that lifestyle. You want to maintain that notoriety. So something as simple as like, "Oh, yeah, we don't want you releasing that album at that time. You need to push that back." Yeah, that's gonna mess up your kind of the vibe of what you want your lifestyle to be. You want to be top. You want to be on top. You want to still be around the center of attention. Even if that center of attention annoys you and bothers you, you still want to be a part of it. The next day, Ringo was back in Abbey Road doing drum overdubs on "Across the Universe," "I, Me, My," and "The Long and Winding Road." Spector's studio tantrums reached to the point where even Ringo put his foot down and ordered him to calm down. But that was nothing compared to Paul's rage at hearing the album. As George Martin said, "That made me very angry, and it made Paul even angrier, because neither he nor I knew it till it had been done. It happened behind our backs because it was done when Alan Klein was running John." Klein and Apple were hyping "Let It Be" with a cover blurb calling it a new phase Beatle album. At the release date for McCartney draw near, Paul prepared a Q&A press kit where he announced a break with the Beatles. Why? Personal differences, business differences, musical differences, but most of all, I have a better time with my family. Temporary or permanent? I don't know. Was he planning to make more music with the Beatles? No. Paul gave Rolling Stones the advanced dirt about the press release right before it came out in April. "We're doing a kit with the album, which is an information thing," he told Jan Wenner, "but I'm not going to tell you anything about it until it's laid on you, because I won't be able to explain it. It's much nicer as a surprise." The other Beatles did not seem to enjoy the niceness of the surprise. Nobody did. Paul claimed to be shocked when his press kit made front page headline all over the world. He said things like this before, "Off forehand," but this time nobody made a move to deny it. Lennon told reporters, "I was happy to hear from Paul. It was nice to find that he was still alive. Anyway, you can say I said it jokingly. He didn't quit. I sacked him." George had the wittiest response. "It looks like we need a new bass player." But the book wasn't closed. None of them could picture life without the Beatles, couldn't even imagine their solo indulgences except as a cheeky riposte to the band. They couldn't yet see this as the end. "I've no idea if the Beatles will work together again or not." John said, "It could be a rebirth or death. We'll see what it is. It'll probably be a rebirth." By now, most of their communication happened in the press, but even as they were raging at one another in public, they were talking about the band in present tense. A few days after Paul's announcement, John told Wenner, "The Beatles haven't had a future for me for the last 2 years. But he also insisted they were still the Beatles. It's a simple fact that he can't have his own way, so he's causing chaos." John said, the way John saw it, Paul wasn't allowed to quit. It was his band after all. He used to sulk and God knows what. Wouldn't turn up for the dates or the bookings. It's always the same, only now it's bigger. We're all bigger. It's the same old game. And then there's another picture right here. So this is Paul. It says Paul and Linda McCartney in London on their wedding day in 1969. Nice. They're joining by Heather, Linda's daughter, by a previous marriage, and Martha, Paul's sheepdog. It's an adorable looking dog. Look at that camera right there. It's such a big camera. And then there's a guy looking right at there's a guy like from the distance looking right at the photographer. Interesting. Even George, so often the group's residents' malcontent, kept talking about their future. He did a New York radio interview in early May. He kept his cool when asked about tension between John and Paul. I think there may be what you'd term a little bitchiness, he said. It's just being bitchy to each other, childish. But when it came to the business, George got corporate, calling Paul's resistant decline a personal problem that he'll have to get over. Why? The reality is that he's outvoted, and we're a partnership, George explained. He was outvoted 3-1, and if he doesn't like it, it's really a pity. Because we're trying to do what's best for the Beatles as a group, or best for Apple as a company. We're not trying to do what's best for Paul and his in-laws. Speaking as a company man, George had a rosy outlook. It's never looked better from my point of view, he said, not quite convincingly. The companies are in great shape. Apple Films, Apple Records. George insisted the Beatles were still a group. They just needed to do solo work as well. I think this is a good way if we do our own albums. That way we don't have to compromise. Paul wants to do his songs his way. He doesn't want to do his songs my way, and I don't want to do my songs their way. Really, I'm sure that after we've all completed an album or even 2 albums, then that notably will have worn off. He laid out a rough but realistic outline for the future the Beatles could have had. For him, this was just another we can work it out argument, no different from the past 10 years. We'll all have to sacrifice a little in order to gain something really big, and there is a big gain by recording together. I think musically and financially, and also spiritually, Beatles music is such a sort of scene. I think the least we can do is sacrifice 3 months or the year at least, just to do an album or 2. I think it's very selfish if the Beatles don't record together. The Let It Be film premiered in London of May 20th, 1970. None of the Beatles showed up or even sent any word they weren't coming. A huge crowd gathered to see them in Piccadilly Circus, but instead got a strange grab bag of red carpet VIPs. Beatles exes Cynthia Lennon and Jane Asher, a Hard Day's Night's director, Richard Lester, a few Hare Krishnas, a few Rolling Stones. The Apple staffers all reported for duty, but had no idea where their bosses were, looking around in vain for the band and feeling guilty about participating. It was bloody sad, bloody awful. Their press officer, Derek Taylor, would write later, in the days after the premiere, I dreaded one of them asking me, "Did you go to the premiere?" None of them asked. The 4 Beatles never got together to watch the movie or listen to the album. The 4 Beatles never met face to face again. Get Back will finally be released in summer 2021, but it still won't have a happy ending. Question will persist about whether the breakup could have or should have been a temporary glitch in the story. The whole Let It Be thing, it's just one snapshot of the time, Jackson said, but then the footage for the movie and the recordings for the album, they end up getting presented to the world in May 1970. They've gone through Phil Spector's hands. Alan Klein's arrived. The Beatles have broken up. It's still the January 69 music, but it's viewed through a filter. Get Back will take different views of the same experience. These guys, when they're together, are not the Beatles, Jackson said. They're not the icons we know. When they're together, they're 4 guys that have known each other since they were 14 or 15 years old. They talk about Hamburg. They chat about the Cavern Club. They just chat about Echo until they had the Top 10 Club. They're not being interviewed. They're just 4 guys who had been through this experience. That includes the moment when Paul pleads that it's crazy to break up over Yoko sitting on an amp. When I mention that line, Jackson knows exactly the moment I mean. As it turns out, that conversation long bootlegged on tape was captured on camera. We've got it all on film, Jackson says. I'll tell you what, that film is powerful. I was aware of the audio. It's one thing to hear the dialogue, but seeing the emotion on their faces when they're having the conversation, it's very powerful. That's ultimately the biggest of Beatles mysteries, which neither can get back nor any other film will resolve. What is it that makes people around the world from all generations and all cultures still hear ourselves in the story? 50 years after the end, Jackson, who has spent his whole career working with giant scale cultural myths, can't explain away this one. They're only the icons they are because the music was so majestically good. I'm not a musicologist. I don't even know if that's a word. That's not where I come from. But all I would say is, no matter if it's 2 tracks or 4 tracks or 8 tracks, there's a joy in the songs that they sang in decades and decades to come. It will never be dulled. It will never be suppressed. That joy, that infectious joy, is part of the human psyche. All right. That is the album, or that's the article. That's not the album. This was created August 17th, 2020 by Rob Sheffield. So I thank you for creating that article. I learned something from that. I actually did not know much about the Beatles breakup. I really don't know much about the Beatles histories, except just, they had different phases, and those different phases affected them musically. A lot of them stayed in the limelight because they're the Beatles, that sort of thing. Let's see, what sort of things can we take out from this article? Well, I didn't know about the nudity part. That part was pretty funny. 2 virgins, interesting title for an article. If that was created in the 2000s, you'd think that would be like a forum shit post, But okay, what was the point of me reading all of that? What was the point? Because I could have. I could have given you a synopsis of it. I could have, that would have saved me kind of like maybe 30 minutes, 40 minutes. But the point of that was just kind of learning together and just kind of getting the experience of just kind of going through, because the people who would have read this article have already read it. They wouldn't be listening to me talking about it. But for those who wouldn't have read this article, for those who wouldn't even know of this story, that was what I was here for. I'm here to learn, and something I'm actually still reading this book, or kind of listening to it, audiobook. It's called The Compound Effect. And it's when you're sort of just kind of letting things stack up, and I do think reading is important. I do think learning is important. Learning from the real world is important. New real world stories, even if it's about, these band members, like that's not, it'd be more real if we were talking about like a shop owner or something. But this is a real story, has real conflicts. It has it doesn't even have a satisfying ending. That's kind of how real life is a lot of the times. But, these are experiences we need to have. We need to start having and learning and grasping and just all that stuff. And I would love to learn it with you guys. I would love to sort of increase my knowledge and just get better and just kind of and be a better host too. I don't know how entertaining this was, but if you were entertained, I'm glad. I want to be more entertaining for different people. I want people to be entertained by just me explaining something. This is again, people could have read this. I don't think, at least I can't think of a lot of people my age who would have read an article that long, so I'm hoping that maybe encouraged you a little bit. I hope I made it somewhat interesting. I hope you learned something. I hope that sort of brought in some sort of dialogue, and I hope, and again, the compound effect. Maybe not now, but it as you continue, maybe I'll continue this as a series, but like, the more you start listening to these things, the more you'll eventually just pick up this little thing from this video, then this little thing from this video, then this little thing, then this little thing, then this little thing. And eventually you'll start to compound and just sort of become brighter, more well known of the world, more interested in how the world works and just, things like that. And maybe I'm looking too far deeply into it. Maybe I'm looking at a big scale. Maybe this video is going to end up getting 0 views. And for that, my throat, you caused my throat went in vain for nothing. But, it benefited me. So I see this video as a success. These videos are going to benefit me no matter what. I want you guys to be a part of the ride. I really do. So yeah, let's see how this video happens. Let's see what happens with this video in this algorithm, because it's much longer than my other videos. I keep hearing that longer the video, the better for YouTube. So we'll see. We'll see if that's true. All right. So yeah, take care. Please like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, because this is going to help me much more than you guys realize. That it'll help me, because YouTube, it's a numbers game. More likes, more views, it's a numbers game. I don't like to believe that. I don't like that idea. I really, but it's YouTube. It's YouTube's rules. I'm making videos on YouTube, so I might as well try to promote myself. All right. So yeah, guys, take care. I hope you learned something. All right. Stay safe, stay beautiful.